As crazy as it may seem, this might be the single toughest offseason in Scott Drew's career.
You are Locked On Baylor, your daily podcast on the Baylor Bears. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Bears fans. Welcome to another episode of Locked On Baylor, brought to you by Game Time. I'm your host, Cam Stewart of ESPN Central Texas and the Cam Show on YouTube through Rogue Media Sports Network. Appreciate you guys making this your first listen today and every day. On today's show, we're going over the Seth Davis article that highlights why this might be the toughest offseason in Scott Drew's career and why this could continue to be a struggle for years to come. Plus, it's basically worked out to be a trade between the Baylor basketball program and the University of Cincinnati. So who won the trade? Who is better off because of it? And also starting to make some offers in the football transfer portal. There might be a literal giant, an actual giant coming to play for the Baylor Bears next year. All that and more coming up on this episode of Locked On Baylor. This has been a difficult offseason basketball-wise for all of us. I don't need to go into too much detail about it. We've done a lot of it. I'll put up the picture again, but this is what Scott Drew has to deal with. And we've been through all that before. He's got to replace the whole team. VJ Edgecombe announced he was going to the NBA draft on Sunday. It was obviously not news. We knew that was coming. And Cam Carr, who came in midseason and had the red shirt, is the only guy who's returning as a scholarship player, technically, from the basketball team a year ago. And it brings up kind of greater questions about NIL and the transfer portal, because as I've mentioned on the show, Baylor, it's not the only one. This has not only happened to Baylor. It happens usually to programs where the coach leaves or you get a new coach. But it has happened to some others that the cupboard just gets stripped bare. And this now begs the question of, is there an NIL problem at Baylor basketball? Because that certainly hasn't been the case over the last few seasons. Baylor's been very competitive in the NIL space in basketball. I think more than most people even realize. A lot of people will say, "Oh, Baylor, they don't have any money." We hear about it in football all the time, but in basketball, they've ponied up money. Norchad Omier got a lot of money. Jeremy Roach got even more money to come here. These were two of the biggest names in the portal last year. So it's not like Baylor has been cheap when it comes to basketball, but what's happening now is they might be being priced out. What wasn't cheap 2 years ago might be cheap now. And so Seth Davis wrote this story highlighting Scott Drew's offseason. It's with Hoops HQ, which is something that Seth Davis pretty much runs. And he went and talked to Scott Drew. He talked to Mack Rhoades kind of about what this is. And of course, we know this is kind of a great race here to get everyone paid front-loaded in NIL payments before this ruling gets brought down for revenue sharing, which is going to happen pretty much any day now. But this has been a struggle for this team, and I think there are a couple of different things that you can point to that don't have to do with NIL that kind of strip the cupboard bare here. But clearly, there has to be some money questions on both sides of this. And so I wanted to read some of the quotes from this in here. Drew would not disclose to Hoops HQ what Baylor's current payroll is, but he's clearly having a hard time keeping up with the programs that have the deepest pockets. Quote, "If you could pay everybody what they wanted, then you wouldn't lose anybody, right?" Drew said. "We have enough resources to build a very competitive team. Would every coach like to have more? Yes. Would every player like to have more? Yes. But that's not the reality." He talks to Mack Rhoades about this too. Mack says this, quote, "We're in what I would call cap circumvention time. There's a handful of schools, and we all know the names, that have some people with significant cash, and we're able to get that to the players up front. This is just a small window of time. Hopefully, we get through this pre-settlement period, and Judge Wilkin will sign the settlement, and then the dust will settle." So it might not even be a problem of Baylor can't raise enough money. It's that they can't raise enough money in 2 weeks. Not going to name any names, Mack Rhoades says, but we know some of the schools that he's talking about. And chiefly BYU is the one that we've had on the end of our lips the last few weeks. Like some of those schools have that ability that they can drop it at the drop of a hat. They can give you $3.5 million or $5 million or $1 million. And that's a lot tougher for Baylor to do. And now all of a sudden, whereas you've been allocating pretty good resources towards this men's basketball program the last few years, it is drying up. And now it's not just a money thing, it's a time and money thing that you can't necessarily keep up with. And who knows, that this might be a pay cut, next year when we do get revenue sharing and there's basically that $20 million cap. I think that works out well for Baylor in a lot of ways, but it could mean less money going into it, especially if there's a football team that's battling for the college football playoff. These athletic departments know where their bread is buttered. Okay. It's not lost on them. And so I say this could be the toughest offseason that Scott Drew's ever had to go through. Now, of course, the the glaring elephant in the room is the first offseason he had coming in 2003. He barely had a team. They didn't have any non-conference games. They were racked by scandal, big time, and they had all these penalties and violations, and it was an absolute mess, probably the worst mess that any college basketball coach has ever gone into at the Division I level. And so that probably takes the cake. But I do want to point this out, which Davis writes in here. The cupboard for the 2025-26 season will be far from bare, but Drew conceded that all of the tumult has taxed his famously effervescent spirit. Quote, every coach would probably tell you the 2 or 3 weeks after the season ends is far and away the worst time of the year. You poured everything into your team and you're completely exhausted. The minute you lose, you're trying to figure out who's coming and who's staying. You have to deal with recruiting your whole roster and you're having player meetings and you can't meet everybody's expectations. This is something that all coaches are still getting used to. Specifically those who have not moved on from jobs in the last few years and haven't had to do this already. Scott Drew, it's draining him. Like you hear it there. It's dampering his effervescent spirit. It's taking a huge toll on him. And I'm sure his whole staff as well. This is, I mean, I know a lot of coaches aren't sympathetic figures with the money they're making, but this was not the job they signed up for. There's no, I don't know if there's any pro sports job that takes up as much time as college football and college basketball do now with NIL and transfer portal. You have to do a whole new job to the point where programs are now hiring general managers to keep it all in order. Scott Drew is not one of those ones that's making $5 to $10 million a year. He is a very likable guy. He is a sympathetic figure. And now he's kind of being dragged through the mud here on a culture that he created for 20 seasons is now not enough. And so, yeah, it's probably not quite there with the scandal he walked into in 2003. But let's take this into account as well. He's got more player turnover than that year, which is crazy to think, but he does. A couple of guys stayed because of the transfer rules, coincidentally enough. A couple of guys stayed on that team. So he's got more player turnover. And oh, yeah, he was 20 years younger when that happened. Okay, now we're talking about a Scott Drew who's in his 50s. I think he's got years left at this school, but you never know. When guys get into their 50s and 60s, we see it with Jay Wright and Tony Bennett. Like those were not old guys. And they said, you know what? I can't, I put my hands up. I can't do this anymore. If there's another season like off season like this next year, because who knows? You could be a damn good team. You could miss the tournament and this could happen to you. Who knows how many more times Scott Drew's going to put himself through this. This is bad. Now, the bright side is Scott's done a really good job kind of rebuilding this roster. Right now, they are a top 5 transfer portal class, which I know some people are like, really? Why? They only have this one good player and this one good player. That's because there's not a lot of teams that are replacing their entire roster. So he's doing it well. He's taking it in stride. But what worries me about this article from Seth Davis is how much more of these can he take? How much more does he want to take? And how can you blame him if he doesn't want to take any more? This has now become a 24/7, 52-week-a-year job. And as much as these basketball coaches poured into that program before, it was not 52 weeks. It was not 365 days. And now it is. And so this does look like it's shaping up to take a serious toll on Scott Drew and his staff. And who knows, man? Who knows how different this thing is when he doesn't have that patented Scott Drew energy, which is much more than a lot of other coaches, at least showing on the sideline. This could be wearing him down. And I find it tough to blame him. This is brutal. And the future of this is so wildly uncertain with when are we going to get this portal thing in check and what kind of money are we going to be able to deal with in the future? I think those are good questions. And we'll see how much more Scott Drew can take. I hope it's a lot more. I hope he's here for a long, long time. But you've already basically worn down 2 Hall of Fame coaches with NIL. You've worn down Jay Wright. You've worn down Tony Bennett. You wore down Jim Larinaga. Quit in the middle of a season. Now, he's a little bit older than the other 2, but this might be too much pretty soon here. Anyway, I'm interested to hear what you guys think. Get involved in the comment section below. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, all that great stuff. Locked On Baylor rolls on. We're going to talk about the player to be named later and the little trade within the conference between Cincinnati and Baylor. Who won it? That's coming up next on Locked On Baylor. But first, a word from one of my favorite sponsors on here, and that, of course, is Game Time. They gave me a great weekend by getting to go out to Wrigley Field again. It was so easy because of these guys. And by the way, there's nothing like the atmosphere of being at a game, especially an NBA playoff game. Every bucket, every defensive stop, every moment just feels huge. That arena gets electric. And with Game Time, you can be a part of it without the stress of last-minute ticket hunting. Game Time makes it fast and easy to get playoff tickets, even when demand is sky high. Prices on the app usually go down as tip-off gets closer, and their last-minute deals can save you up to 60%. Trust me, I did it this weekend. Baseball game, 1:20 p.m. I bought the tickets at 9 a.m. It was perfect. And the all-in pricing means no surprise fees at checkout. So what you see is what you pay. My absolute favorite part about Game Time. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, and that, of course, is guaranteed. So a bit of news in the transfer portal. Jalen Celestine, our old friend, Baylor starter from a year ago, the Cal transfer, has now made his transfer official and where he's actually going. He has picked the Cincinnati Bearcats. And the Cincy fans, which is good basketball fans historically, are way into this. They love bringing in Jalen Celestine. They see that 2 years ago, the kid shot 44% from 3. Maybe they saw how well he did against Kansas this year for Baylor. And so now this works out as a little bit of a trade. We're waiting to see if we have traded Rob Wright for Keelan Marion on the football side. Probably not. We saw the player to be named later trade with Mississippi State. Brought in Sawyer Robertson. Gave them Blake Shapen a year later. Check. That worked. And now the Cincinnati one. Because Baylor gets Dan Skillings. And about, a week and a half later, Cincinnati gets Jalen Celestine. So who wins that trade? That's what I'm worried about. And it's not just because of the name of this podcast, because they don't pay me. Well, Baylor does not. But I think the Bears win this trade. I was a little rough on Dan Skillings when he committed. And again, I'm not saying you're getting an all Big 12 player necessarily, but you got a guy that was close to that 2 years ago, close to an all Big 12 player, averaging 13 a game, starting for Cincinnati. Knows that he could start in this conference. And Jalen Celestine, I think we had questions all year long as whether he could start in this conference. He did. Probably started more games than Dan Skillings did this past year in the Big 12. But I think Celestine, while being a good kid, was a bit of a disappointment on the floor for the Bears this year. At least that's the way I felt for most of the season. I know social media kind of had that feeling as well. You brought in a guy who was supposed to be a catch and shoot, knockdown shooter, well over 40%. And he was not that. He was well under 40%. His role had to change. I don't think he necessarily loved that. And he just, part of it was Baylor's roster construction and a lack of depth in the front court. But he just had to become something he was not in his time, his brief time in Waco. And so Baylor rebuilding their whole roster, going out and getting a guy who is a starter quality in the Big 12, that's a big move. Cincinnati, who couldn't throw the ball in the ocean from a boat last year, getting a guy who has one shot over 40% from three, I think they feel they're getting a big part of their team revamped, so to speak. And I'll go back to Wes Miller's coaching style. I've said it several times. I've used this term, but I see it as mucking it up. Okay, like that's all, press Virginia, Big 12. Like, let's get into a rock fight and see who wins. Houston does it. Iowa State does it to some extent. Tech used to do it more than they do now. They've got some more skill on the offensive end now. And I am very intrigued to see how Jalen Celestine fits into that. The same way I did with LJ Cryer. I think LJ Cryer was a better player than Jalen Celestine, and so it kind of worked. But Celestine is a corner 3-point shooter. Is he going to be gritty enough to really get minutes for Wes Miller and the Cincinnati team? I find that to be fascinating. Whereas Dan Skillings, is he the grittiest guy yet on the team? Probably not. But he was out there. He was starting for him. He was seen as a better defender this past year than an offensive player this past year. And so you already know that you don't need to teach that kid grit versus coming from this Baylor team this past year. No knock on anybody, but it's like, we'll probably got to teach this kid some grit. Okay. And they weren't kind of the most blue collar team that we've ever seen at Baylor outside of North Chatham-Mere. So who wins this trade? I think it's the Bears. And if it's the TikTok side of things, it's definitely Baylor. You got rid of a streamer in Jason Asamoah, but you do get a big-time TikToker who I guess that was a big thing for the Cincinnati fans. They were getting kind of sick of that. But so far, Baylor's done pretty well in these trade things. We're still waiting to get something back from TCU, either in baseball or football. But for the most part, the Bears have done well in the trades. I mean, the Mississippi State one is unbelievable. It clears so big. I mean, Sawyer Robertson is already better than Blake Shapen ever was in the Big 12. Hope Blake is healthy and can play for Mississippi State this year. But yeah, it was a big-time win. Big-time win. And I guess if you want, BYU maybe wins the trade. We'll see. Rob Wright's a better player than the Barrington brothers probably were. And I don't know, Jeff Grimes was the offensive coordinator for your best team ever. Anyway, I'm getting too bogged down in the trades. Let me know who you thought won this Baylor-Cincinnati one, which didn't need a year in between or 2 years in between. Dan Skillings to Waco, Jalen Celestine to one of 5 Queen cities in the world, this one being Cincinnati. I hope you like the chili, Jalen. I hope you do. A little bit closer to Canada. Anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Be sure to like and subscribe if you're on YouTube. Of course, you can find us wherever you find your podcasts as well. We continue on. Baylor football, transfer portal, a potential Big 12 target, and a guy who's like the size of 2 of me. That's coming up next on Locked On Baylor. But first, today's episode is brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks. Baseball season is in full swing, and there's no better way to get in on the action than with Prize Picks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With Prize Picks, you just pick more or less on at least 2 player projections, and if you're right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. Whether it's strikeouts, RBI, first inning runs, Prize Picks keeps every game exciting. Setting a lineup takes less than 60 seconds, and when you win, your payout is quick, safe, and secure, fast and simple. I always take advantage of Taco Tuesday, which is today, where Prize Picks offers discounts on select player projections for even more value. So download the app today. Use the code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDON, COLLEGE, for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. Baylor football has to kind of be busy in the transfer portal. Not the same way men's basketball has to be, but they've got some positions they still need to fill. And of course, we're thinking wide receiver being a big one of them. And certainly they've offered a couple of guys, including Keelan Marion from BYU. As I said on yesterday's show, I'm not holding my breath on Keelan Marion. He's getting offers from all of these SEC schools, which are willing to put out over $1 million to go and get him. I know that might be crazy to some people because he's really more of a kick returner than he is a receiver, but that's just the reality of the game they're playing out there in the SEC. And furthermore, what's more, Baylor has Keelan Marion at home, but even better, they've got Josh Cameron, who is just as good, if not a better kick returner. I know Marion was first-team All-American, but Josh Cameron knocked him out of first-team All-Big 12, and he's a much better receiver. He had more than twice the catches that Keelan Marion had, so I'm not holding my breath on that. Then they start offering some offensive linemen, including this one, which there's not much information on him, but the information we do get, you almost have to see to believe. Clinton Azubuike, not to be confused with the Azubuike who used to play at KU, the center, the basketball center, crushed us that one game in 2020, not the other game in 2020. Anyway, he comes from Northern Arizona. He's entered the portal already. He's got offers from a bunch of different places around the country. He's already visited Boise. He's visited Vanderbilt. He's an offensive lineman, tackle, sophomore, so a couple of years of eligibility left. And he stands at 6'9", which for my money would be the tallest player that they've had since Sean Oakman, who also stood at 6'9". I think Sidney Fugar is like 6'7", 6'8". He's pretty big too. Clinton Azubuike is 6'9" as a sophomore, so he's got a couple years left. He's an international player, which we're usually talking about for basketball. But here we are in football. He's from Lagos, Nigeria, and actually played at the NFL Academy, which I believe is in the UK. There's a couple of them. Baylor's offered kids out of there before, straight out of high school, not necessarily in the portal. But I'm interested to see how much Baylor bulks up their offensive line here, because they're in kind of an interesting situation where they probably feel like they have a good 5 guys to be their starting unit on the team right now. But there's a couple that we haven't seen, and most of the guys coming back only have 1 year left. So you're trying to build some depth as well as your 5 guys to start the season. So Clinton Azubuike is a guy to look out for. Another guy who has not been offered by Baylor yet, but one to kind of keep an eye on, and this is ambitious, I'll say, is AJ Halsey, the safety from Houston. Safety is another position I'm interested to see how they attack. They got Devin Turner in the first window, and I think that's a damn good pickup, and you probably get a good safety unit right now. But AJ Halsey, man, this was one of, if not the best safeties in the Big 12 this past year at Houston. He had 5 interceptions on the year, including picking off both Josh Hoover and Sawyer Robertson. Remember Sawyer's game against the UH Cougars? AJ Halsey was a big reason why he looked like it was his worst game of the season. 43 solo tackles as well. The guy is a tackle machine. He had 72 in the year before, which is not necessarily what you want as a team from your safety, because that's the last line of defense, but he is a sure-handed tackler. He also had 7 passes defended on the year. One of the absolute ball hawks of this conference. He's another one that's getting offers from everywhere, including the SEC. And while those dollar figures, again, might seem crazy for us, the SEC schools will go towards $1 million for a starting safety. They will. And that's a lot of money to turn down. I know this was a surprise. There we go. A surprise to UH, because they literally interviewed Connor Wegman at practice the other day, And he was talking about how good AJ is and how much of a boost he's going to be for them this year. And an hour later, he entered the transfer portal. That's just today's college football. So it's one that really intrigues me because I think there are some reinforcements that you can get for that secondary. And it is an area of concern, or at least an area of concentration for this Baylor team this year. And whether they are willing to go out and spend some money and get an all Big 12 caliber guy in AJ Halsey, who led the team in interceptions last year at Houston. For a good Houston defense, their offense was horrible, but their defense was pretty good. So let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Who should Baylor be going after in this portal window? Let me know down in the comment section. Be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel. We're your number one source for Baylor sports news. It's not coming straight from the university. And we're on the march towards 4,000 subscribers, and we're getting damn close because of you guys and the great community that we have built here. So continue to like, continue to subscribe. It helps me out a lot. As Drake would say, and it's true, it helps me keep my job, truly. So get involved. Ring that notification bell to get notified every time we're dropping a video on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. We will see you guys tomorrow on your favorite show, Locked On Baylor.